Yeah, so today we have a guest speaker, Dr. Alex Halderman. He's a professor of computer science and engineering at the University of Michigan and director of Michigan's Center for Computer Security and Society. And Dr. Halderman wrote us an email in early January that we briefly touched on at the last meeting. So I just want to say a couple quick comments about what I was envisioning for this agenda item, and then turn it over to Dr. Halderman for about 5 minutes or so for him to just, say some things. But basically for this item, I thought we could focus on number one, just understanding what the DVS order privacy flaw is. And then secondly, I thought we could kind of talk about what we might be able to do going forward to ensure that the director and the department have a chance to hear about issues like these sooner. I know Dr. Halderman tried to reach out to the Secretary of State, and or he did reach out to the Secretary of State and the federal agencies well in advance of the election, but that word didn't necessarily trickle down to the department. So Dr. Halderman, I wanted to turn it over to you, and I also like to just thank you very much for being so generous with your time. And I know you're 3 hours ahead, so it's very late for you right now. And I know you have a really busy schedule.
Well, Commissioner Jordanek and members of the commission, thank you so much for the opportunity to address you tonight. It is rather late for me, but I'll do my best. If I may, could I show just a few slides to perhaps give an overview of the technical situation?
Of course.
All right, thank you.
Do you have privileges, or do I need to do something?
Let me see. Can you see?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, so just a few words about who I am and where I'm coming from. I'm a computer scientist, a professor of computer science and engineering at the University of Michigan. My work is about cybersecurity, and much of it touches on elections. I try to use science and technology to make elections more trustworthy. I've also worked considerably in elections and public policy, including testifying twice to the U.S. Congress about threats facing our elections. I, in addition, have had the privilege of working frequently with election officials. I co-chair the state of Michigan's Election Security Advisory Commission, and about a decade and a half ago now, I participated in the California Secretary of State's top-to-bottom review of election technology. I'm here to talk about a problem that my team discovered that we call DVS order. And what it is it's a privacy flaw that affects data produced by certain Dominion ballot scanners, including the Dominion ICE ballot scanner that's used in San Francisco for about 8% of votes. It's used, I understand, for in-person voting. The flaw, and I underscore, cannot be used to alter election results. However, it does, under some scenarios, threaten voter privacy, and I think it's important to seriously address. So here's the problem. Dominion scanners, in order essentially to try to protect privacy, assign each ballot that they scan a random looking ID number. This ID number is carried through even after the ballot data is otherwise shuffled and rearranged, again to protect privacy. But it appears alongside the content of the ballot when data like ballot images or cast vote records is produced and published. And this is all data that San Francisco makes public. What my team discovered is that these random IDs are actually completely predictable. Unfortunately, and for the nerds in the audience, what's happening is the scanners use what's called a linear congruential generator. And this is something that we've known since the 1970s. It's completely unsuitable for security applications. But the upshot is that using only public information, well, anyone can deduce the algorithm that's used to assign these ID numbers and fully unshuffle all of the voted ballots. Now, the privacy risk that this implies is that using data San Francisco makes public anyone can unshuffle all of the ballots cast on ICEs and learn both the order in which they were cast and, by associating them with other data, the time that each ballot was cast. Now, most voters probably aren't going to have their names published with their ballots tomorrow as a result of this, but it does pose a threat in several quite potential scenarios. For instance, poll workers, election observers, or other voters in a polling place could note the time a victim scans their ballot and then later go and find their ballot online. For instance, if I go to vote with my wife, she or I could figure out how the other voted. Also, some voters quite inadvertently publish information online that would be sufficient to reveal how they voted, even long into the future. For instance, it's become quite popular to tweet out your voter number when going to the polls. Along with where you voted, this could be enough to identify your ballot. So the steps to protect against this are actually pretty simple. The most immediate mitigation is to remove or replace the ballot IDs before publishing ballot-by-ballot data. And that's enough to stop members of the public from exploiting the problem. Dominion has produced a software update that is now undergoing certification testing at the federal level and in California. However, I have no way to test whether that patch correctly fixes the problem. So I'll have to stop there in terms of how much I endorse it. Now, I'd like to, given the focus of the discussion, I'd like to just quickly go over the steps that I and my team took to try to inform people about this problem. We discovered it last summer and quickly realized that there were hundreds of jurisdictions potentially affected over 21 states, and as well as parts of Canada, Puerto Rico, and others. So in August, we informed Dominion directly, as well as the federal EAC and CISA. In October, after giving the agencies and Dominion time to assess the problem, we wrote to state election officials directly in each of the affected states, including California Chief of Elections Jana Lean, and you have my letter to her. Then finally, on October 14th, we made our findings public, knowing that jurisdictions might have to change the data they publish in order to protect against this. So we wanted some explanation for the public to be available. We also published open source software to help jurisdictions test for and correct the flaw. Now, given those steps, I was quite surprised in early November when I went to the San Francisco elections website and noticed that data that was being published from the November election was still vulnerable to the flaw. So immediately I wrote to and sent a Twitter DM to the Department of Elections explaining the problem, attaching the same disclosure I had sent to the state, and urging some quick steps to fix it, but I didn't get any response. And that's why in early January I wrote to this commission. The takeaways that I'd like to leave you with are first to just thank San Francisco for being really, truly a national leader in election data transparency. The kind of data you publish, including ballot-by-ballot data, it goes a long way to both supporting accuracy and upholding voter confidence. And this data can continue to be published safely, but I think this flaw is an illustration of why extra care is sometimes going to be necessary to safeguard privacy. Now, it's also a reminder that timely information about vulnerabilities is crucial for security. But it seems to me that something broke down in the process that caused San Francisco, unfortunately and unnecessarily, to publish potentially vulnerable data from the November election, even after the flaw was known to the manufacturer, the federal agencies, and the state. Next time that researchers like me discover flaws affecting election systems, I'd like to know how we can make sure that San Francisco and jurisdictions like it get the information they need in order to respond promptly. So thank you very, very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Halderman. So commissioners, would anyone like to ask him a question or questions?
Commissioner Bernholz.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Professor Halderman. Am I correct then in understanding that simply by not publishing those numbers, this problem is mitigated?
It's greatly mitigated. There's still a threat that the data could leak in the future. There's a threat that someone on the inside who has access to the data could exploit it. But that significantly reduces the risk because the public then cannot, anyone in the public can't exploit the data directly.
Right, it would take a malicious actor inside. So, okay. And
Or a
then
data breach, yes.
in terms of the Dominion update, I presume you can't test it now because it's not yet been set out into for use? Or will you be able to test it once it's in place?
Well, there'll be some things we'll certainly be able to try after the new update is in use. But Dominion hasn't shared information with us about their strategy in trying to address this, and certainly hasn't given us any opportunity to test the new data. I'm somewhat concerned because the same certification processes, of course, that are examining the update are the ones that examined the original software and didn't notice this flaw that, in our view, probably should have been obvious if they were giving due consideration to privacy. So there are also implications for the scope of testing in the future.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And then this may be a question for Director Arntz, but I'll ask you as well. Is the reason that the numbers were published in the first place to help individual voters see their own individual ballot? Is that the proposed purpose of publishing those numbers?
So no, it's the purpose of them is just to have a way of following the same ballot across different parts of the election system, essentially. But the voter isn't supposed to be able to identify their own ballot. Part of the security that the system is designed to ensure is that the ballot order and identification isn't known to anyone.
So by removing the numbers, that sounds like there's no loss to the individual voter or to the voting populace.
Well, what we suggest, instead of just removing them outright, is essentially replacing them consistently with different actually random numbers. So it would be helpful, for instance, to be San Francisco releases data in multiple formats and in multiple iterations as new votes come in. There are updates to the data sets, for instance. So it would be very helpful to be able to know that a ballot in release 1 of the data set is the same ballot as the equivalent record in release 2, etc. The open source software that we provided is designed to replace the IDs while ensuring that consistency. So there's
so that's what your patch does, is actually provides different numbers,
So that's right. And to be clear, it's not a patch. It doesn't change the voting machines itself, but it's a tool for processing the data before you upload it to the website, essentially, to replace the vulnerable IDs with new securely randomized ones.
Thank you for clarifying that. So it's a brief additional step provided by this open source tool that you've provided on the website.
That's right.
And last question, and again, thank you for your time. Other jurisdictions, have they responded?
We've gotten responses from some other jurisdictions. Frankly, less communication than we would have expected, given the number of people who are at stake. However, I will note that the number of large jurisdictions that publish detailed data unfortunately remains fairly low. And where data is being published, it's often through a FOIA process rather than through a well thought out official publication process like San Francisco uses.
That makes good sense. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Bernholz. Anyone else? Commissioner Dyke?
Thank you very much, Professor Halderman. What response did you get from the state of California then?
We also didn't get a response from the state of California.
So as far as you know, the certification process has not been modified.
I don't know anything about any changes to the certification process. No, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
But we haven't gotten further communication after our disclosure to the state.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Halderman, I have a few questions. The first one was something that you touched on is related to the certification process. You know, there's the federal process as well as California has its own process. So I just wanted to ask you, like, is it your understanding that it is the certification process's intent to catch issues like these, or is it sort of out of scope for the process?
Well, it's a good question. The federal certification process, it's not clear whether the privacy issues like these are in scope. The new VVSG does include a stronger notion of privacy in the standard, but it's not reflected in the test instances that they are using presently. And in any case, this software is certified under the old VVSG 1.0. California's process, I'm a little bit less familiar with the details of the current process, but I believe it to be relatively more intensive than the federal process, at least more transparent.
Do they check the source code as part of that process? Do you know?
I believe there is source code review as part of it, but a problem like this, so if in the certification of the change, the testers are asking carefully whether this problem is solved, I believe they'll do a good job. If they're asking merely whether other problems that might affect certification are introduced, well, I'd urge them to think carefully about whether the patch addresses the problem, because there are some subtleties.
Okay. And then my next question is a little bit related, and it's about open source voting systems. And San Francisco has been interested in open source voting since around 2008. And I just wanted you to comment on, like, how would things have been different if this had been an open source system? Like, would it be easier to find issues like these, or would it, just, you can comment on that.
Oh, I'm sure the problem would have been found long ago if the system was open source. Researchers first pointed out that a problem with ballot ID randomization threatened voter privacy in another voting system almost 20 years ago, in one of the first serious academic security studies about US election system. And it's just completely remarkable to me that this is still a problem in machines that are being sold new today. So I think there's been an underappreciation of privacy issues by vendors and regulators in this space, and making code open would expose so many more eyes to, right, how are these numbers being generated, and are they actually leaking information?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. And then one more question. So one of the things I wanted to focus on is what we can do as a commission to kind of make things better in the future. You know, for example, I could see us writing a letter to the Secretary of State, asking them to be better about communicating these issues to the local jurisdiction when they hear about it. But I also wanted to ask you, like, is there anything that a local elections department like San Francisco could do to make it easier for security researchers like you and your team to notify departments when you find out about things like this?
Well, given San Francisco's scale and sophistication, perhaps you have the resources to have an email address that's for security reports that's publicly available and monitored. I don't know what happened internally to my communications, whether they just didn't reach the right person or whether there was such a queue that they didn't get read in time. But having some channel that is publicly available, many organizations and an increasing number of states have dedicated security email addresses for reports like this, and perhaps San Francisco elections is that. It's also possible that I miss some obvious channels myself, in which case, if you have good channels already, making them easier to find through your public websites and through internet searches could be a boon. But also figuring out with the state what's happening, and perhaps asking the EAC and CISA for help getting information like that to you as well. There's so many jurisdictions that for researchers coming from the outside like me, we couldn't possibly go down the whole list and even determine exactly who the relevant contacts were. But the states and the federal agencies, I believe it should be part of their job to maintain that information and provide information sharing. So I really want to know what happened in this instance and how we can all be doing a better job to help jurisdictions like you and your voters next time.
Okay, and then just on the security email address, is there a standard way to publicize those?
There is a standard. There's I think now a security.txt standard that might be pertinent to this, that works a little bit like robots.txt.
Okay.
But also just having it on the contact page could be helpful.
Okay, and then lastly, when is your paper coming out? Do you have a paper on this?
We have a paper that's working its way through the publication pipeline now. Perhaps by this summer we'll have a more detailed paper. But I'd love to, if there's further information available about both the disclosure process in San Francisco and about your future plans for all of this, I'd love to be able to include them in some of our writing and review of this incident, which, again, it's not a problem that affects San Francisco predominantly, not San Francisco more than these other jurisdictions, but your position as such a leader in data publication, I think could serve as a positive model given effective remediation. One other thing I would add to your previous question, though, and I know we're late, is that the vendors have a very important role to play in this. And I would be extremely surprised if, in fact, Dominion didn't let San Francisco know that this problem had been found and reported to them. And I would be surprised if they don't have some contractual obligation to share that information to you when it's relevant and actionable. But that would be something I would be asking in your position.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, thank you very much again for all the work that you and your team have done, and also for reaching out to us and for being here this evening to present to us. Commissioners, does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask? Okay, I don't see any.
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you all so very much for the opportunity.
Sleep well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can open it up for discussion. Vice President Jordanek, were you gonna make a comment?
Well, I thought we could maybe, yeah, I was just going to see if we could discuss and maybe
Yeah.
talk about it with Director Ernst as well. But
Yeah. Take the reins.
okay, yeah, so yeah, Director Ernst, I just had a couple of questions. Like number one, did you or your department know about this issue before Election Day, or did you hear about it from anyone, or?
No. Dominion did issue notice in September that how they phrase it, there are questions about posting the cast vote record in relation to posting, in conjunction to posting videos when people voted, which didn't really apply to us because we don't post videos. And then they issued a second notice indicating that someone who I guess was Professor Halderman, had reviewed a previous version of the software and indicated that the order of ballots could be discerned, and then to check the local law regarding posting of cast vote records. So again, it wasn't something that was directly on point to San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, I did see those documents, and I agree with you that they were kind of vague in what they were really saying. But I was wondering, do you think you could share those with the commission, or? Okay.
Sure.
And I guess, yeah, I guess those are the only questions I had.
I have a question.
Commissioner Dye.
Thank you. I was wondering, so I get your point that it's probably pretty unlikely that someone, I mean, the examples that he cited where you would literally have to be watching and noting, you know, the time and the precinct that someone voted in. I guess my question is, even though it's unlikely, given that Professor Halderman has provided a software to, you know, to fix this and strip those numbers and replace them, how much effort would it be to run those, run the data through and clean it up and repost?
I don't know, but we're not going to change the results that have been posted, because the cast vote record is part of the official certification of the election in San Francisco.
Okay.
And we hash all the information. And so we can't even break that hash to post new records. And also, I mean, that time has passed as far as the November election is concerned. So no, I don't, I'm sure the tool is easy to use the way it's described, but we're not going to go back and change the records from that election.
Okay.
And then one more follow-up question. Do you know what the appropriate contact point for something like that? Is it best to use the general inbox, or do you know, in terms of reaching out to you?
I mean, contact me, one. I mean, but also Professor Halderman, I think he didn't he interact with the commission in September 2021. So I believe he had the commission's, he spoke at the commission meetings previously. So I would think that he would have the commission's address, but he can also just contact me. I did check my emails. I didn't have anything forwarded to me from the general email box about this. So and DMing on Twitter normally isn't how we would pick up information about the voting system. So, but you know, they can call too. There's different ways.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Any other comments, commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Bernholz.
Director Arntz, it seems to me that the other two suggestions that Professor Halderman made about a security at SF elections email would be an easy thing to add, and or adding it into the metadata of the website, like robot.txt, if there's a security.txt, if I understood that correctly. Those seem like easy fixes.
Yeah.
Because he's,
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
just because Professor Halderman is only one of many security researchers who might find something.
Certainly, we can put an email address on our website.
And then, so in terms of the 2024 election, I guess there are two questions. One is, will Dominion's update solve this problem, which we should have plenty of time to figure out before 2024? But if it doesn't, might the department insert this extra step that Professor Halderman described, the tool that he's created, requiring, which is prior to posting cast vote records? Would you?
Possibly. Possibly. I think we have to wait to what Dominion does and how it's reviewed by the state. Because if the department does anything to the data, it's not the official information from the voting system. So everything that we post is directly generated from the voting system. We don't take any intervention with that information.
Okay, that makes sense. I just, okay. I'll have to think about that thank you. Thanks, Director.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else want to make a comment who hasn't spoken? Okay, Commissioner Dye.
It seems to me that I do think writing a letter to the Secretary of State's office about this issue and whether trying to understand whether these checks on privacy are part of their certification process, because if it is out of scope, then the next certification isn't going to catch it either. So I think raising it as an issue, I think it would be good for the commission and Director Arntz to write a letter about that, because we rely on the certification from the state to tell us the systems are good. And not only that, we are forced to certify the election. And if doing so compromises voter privacy, I think that's a problem. Even though it might be very obscure in this particular case, the next error may not be.
Point of information, just so I remember, the professor said that they did reach out to the Secretary of State's office, correct?
Correct. And got
Okay.
no response from California.
Yeah,
so.
just wanted to clarify.
So what I'm suggesting is we put a little juice on it, being a large jurisdiction in California, expressing our concern about it. And it's great that Dominion has a fix. But again, it was a certified system. So, if privacy checks are not part of their certification processes, and this is an algorithm that has been known to be flawed since the 1970s, I'm really concerned.
Vice President Jordan.
Yeah, so just real quickly, so Dr. Halderman he never presented to the commission before, just on that point. But in terms of a letter, I think it's a good idea for us to do something like that. I think the letter could maybe touch on number one, make sure that the communication channels are better going forward, for notifying the department. And number two, it could also ask about
Scope.
Assurance that this has been fixed. How do we?
Assurance that this particular error has been fixed, but also that their certification scope includes checks on privacy.
Point of order, let's let Vice President Jordan finish, and then we'll come back to you, Commissioner Day.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to ask if the commission feels a letter would be appropriate, like what do people think would be the best process for that? Ranging from delegating, giving President Stone the authority versus drafting something and having us look at it at the next meeting. I don't know what.
Commissioner Day.
I'd actually suggest that Director Arntz write the letter.
So,
I mean,
go.
the Secretary of State's supposed to be serving San Francisco, right? And should be notifying us of flaws like this, and their certification processes should be good enough to catch them, presumably.
So this is President Stone. I would support a letter from the commission. I don't think that we should compel the director to draft a letter, but I do think that we can draft one, and I would be open if perhaps Vice President Jordan, since this was an agenda item that you wanted to make sure resurfaced, perhaps I could propose that you work and you could work in collaboration with another commissioner, but maybe you draft it for us to review at the next meeting.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you. I like that idea.
Would others like to comment on that as well?
I just suggest you get some input from John on that.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's take public comment.
Okay, I'm just pulling up the list here. It's off my screen. Okay, it looks like there are 4 hands. So just go in order here. Mr. Turner, I'm unmuting you. you have,
Yes, we're glad that Professor Halderman raised the issue and Commissioner Jordanek followed up here. This brings the privacy issue forward, but also the certification issue. Per Roy Saltman, who is known as the father of the certification process, the certification process in the United States, including the California process, is a broken process due to the proprietary software issue. So this is why we advocate for open source systems. We can complain about this and have little gotcha moments, but we're never going to solve anything until we get rid of these proprietary systems, which is what the federal and state legislation coming forward proposes to do. It's the as the former communications director for Open Voting Consortium, we're proud to be the catalyst for not only the local voting system task force in San Francisco, but also the California 2007 top to bottom review. So I speak with some authority when we say we appreciate Dr. Halderman's finding regarding unshuffling and commensurate privacy issues, but want to highlight this is just one of many vulnerabilities attached to the Dominion system, as well as any system that will be running proprietary code. So I'm glad that you're finally coming around into the light on this issue. I know there's a propensity to protect John Arnst here because he's a very affable fellow, very congenial, but the fact is we're out of our league here having these conversations. Two people that do understand this is I know because I've had intense conversations with folks that actually know what they're talking about that involved Chris Jordanek. So we applaud Mr. Jordanek here and Professor Halderman, but we have to all stipulate that very few of us have the technology chops to engage in this conversation. So we have to defer when we hear issues like this. And let me just guarantee you that the certification process in the United States is broken and cannot be repaired until we move forward with open source systems. Dominion systems, for these reasons and issues concerning voter perception and confidence, must be replaced. And the public implores you again, this commission has the power to do things for the benefit of not only the state, but for the United States. And now we're going into 2024. We already had riots in 2016 that could have been avoided, but now we're doing this circular talk. And we just hope that you cease and desist ignoring the public pleas to move forward with the open source systems. Thank you.
okay, thank you. So next we have a member of the public. I'm unmuting you.